Dying is mostly considered as not nice. I'm of course stating the obvious, but if we look at video games, there's a clear shift from death as the end, and often the ultimate punishment, to death being a reset, and something that has to be punished. Sounds ridiculous, but for example in real life, the mayor of Leila-Vandu outlawed death in 2000, and on an island in Japan you are prohibited from dying or even having a stillborn. Those laws are usually outdated and are meant more satirical. In games, however, it's usually considered that if death is a failure on the player, it should be punished. In video game context, I would call the death penalty the penalty for death, and not the penalty in form as death. There is no established terminology, so I need to clarify this at the start. This video will be mostly about the death penalty, but I also combined this with Thymesia. I first wrote the script as a sole review on Thymesia, but I caught myself so much writing about this issue that I shifted the focus of this video because my biggest problem with Thymesia is closely tied to the death penalty. Thymesia is a Souls-like. You try to prevent damage while doing some in return. Like in Bloodborne, there is just evade and parry, although there is a way to block, but it's highly ineffective. Doing damage is probably the biggest difference to the Souls formula, because you first inflict wounds that heal if you stop doing damage. You can use a claw to make the wound into actual life loss, which sounds interesting but makes combat a bit more tedious, because enemies take way too much damage, consider how much work you have to kill them. When you die, you leave behind your experience, which each Souls-like calls different, but it's always the same. If you reach your left behind experience, you can retake it, and if you die before that, it's permanently lost. This sounds initially like a harsh punishment, but compared to other games that reset your character, for example by reloading a save game, it is not. Let's make a comparison between two games almost everyone will have played: Skyrim and Dark Souls. In Dark Souls you go to a place, kill enemies for 5 minutes, and then die for any reason. You then can return and retake your experience or it's gone. In Skyrim, let's do the same. We go to a place, get experience or skill increases, and then die. We have to reload and we get no option to get anything back. We have to do all again. In this case, Skyrim is harsher than Dark Souls. Why it does not feel that way is because of the save system. Souls games cannot be saved manually or allow quick saves. When you die, you have to do the whole path up to your death again, but in the Elder Scrolls you can save any time, even right before you died. So you only lose a bit of progress and instead you suffer from save game anxiety, making you press the save button like every 2 minutes. But this is not the death penalty. This is the save system combined with the death penalty. If we want to make a fair comparison, we need to exclude this. Skyrim is very traditional in its approach. You die, you reload. In very old games without any sort of save game, you had to restart the whole game, but in most of our game history, that was the primary way of handling death penalty. Then in modern times, developers got more innovative with death. They changed death as a sole penalty to a systematic game mechanic that can alter the experience. While Dark Souls was not the first, it was definitely the most prominent in doing this. They reduced the penalty for death to raise tension. When you die and you try to get your souls back, your second run will always have more tension because now your progress is in danger. The stakes rose and you feel more nervous, and to some extent fear, the fear of loss. The emotions this provokes are akin to horror games, but From Software only breached the dam. For the harsher punishments, Hellblade deletes your save file if you die too many times. Don't Starve deletes your character after dying, and the highest penalty without breaking the fourth wall is probably 1 life. A game that you cannot restart. If you die, then your account dies with you. In these games, death is used to increase tension and rewards a careful playstyle. But you can even be creative in the opposite direction. The game with the lowest death penalty without removing death itself is Celeste. A platformer I personally never played because I hate platformers. In this game you get a screen of challenges, and if you die, you start at the beginning of the screen again. Death here means usually just a progress loss of just a few seconds, and nothing else. This very low death penalty allows the developers to make hard and sometimes complex platforming without frustrating the player. You use a low death penalty to focus on the challenge. And death can be frustrating in games. Most of the time you feel that way if you think that the death was not deserved. Csikszentmihalyi's theory on flow describes how we find pleasure in activities and has long been used in modern game studies. In his theory he compares the challenge and the player's skill, and if the skill of the player is higher than the challenge, players depending on the difference, might feel bored. If the challenge is higher, a player might feel anxiety. In between, where the player's skill are perfect for the game's challenge, is the flow. Tom Andersson and Hampus Strömsholm of the Malmö University describe it as, quote, Csikszentmihalyi has made extensive research in the area of flow and described it as an optimal experience in which individuals can be so involved in an activity that the entirety of their attention is devoted to that one specific moment. Csikszentmihalyi views flow as the optimal state for a player, and so flow is extremely important for games, and in logical conclusion, controlling the flow or using it can give the developer important tools. Death in video games is for the most part a consequence of a player not meeting the game's challenge, but also the very source of anxiety. The removal or alteration of the death penalty is subsequently a shift in flow. This is the death penalty in a vacuum, but games are not made in such way. All parts need to combine to make a game, but in Famicia's case there is one big problem. Souls games for the most part have a definite number of life for each run, and taking damage is heavily punished, which means preventing damage is the most important part for Souls combat. In Famicia you can only parry and evade. And evading is not really viable, nor is it the intent of the developer. There's a clear focus on parrying, which feels and looks incredible when it works, but Famicia lacks rhythm. Rhythm in this case is an overall delay between announcement and effect. Many games have a general cooldown on skills, and in this example, it's analog to Famicia. Dark Souls 3 changed this by having enemies sometimes take longer until they hit, which makes it really hard to evade those attacks, because they break pattern. In Famicia's case, all enemies do that. All enemies have a different amount of time from when they indicate an incoming attack to when it will hit. If this was a Souls title, I would just block until I get the timing and see the right pattern. But Famicia has effectively only parrying, and this leads to always taking damage from new enemies, or you just spam parry in hopes of them connecting. This is a problem connected to harsh punishment for taking damage, and then getting penalized for a death that does not feel deserved. You didn't have a chance from the start, so you get frustrated. I loved the fights where I knew when and how to parry, and hated everything where I didn't know that yet. I would like to propose more enemy variety, but that would also increase this very core problem. There's also only leveling your character, no equipment to find, which discourages you from exploring. I still think Famicia is good, but it's way too short, empty and flawed in combat to make it anywhere near the Souls-likes from today. Farewell.